In philosophy, a theory is conjectural, speculative, experiential, intuitive, unsubstantiated. A scientific theory is the complete opposite in the realm of science. It is the most robust framework of substantiated evidence for a particular phenomenon that you could possibly have. What's going on, YouTube? And it's those Tucker Carlson makes an appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast and makes a fool out of himself by asserting that evolution is not true. And as a scientist, I could not let that tomfoolery slide. So let's get a dose of this shit. Now, for those of you who are unaware, one of the reasons that I do what I do is to combat science denial and scientific illiteracy. So anytime I hear an individual make claims about what they believe science is or isn't, or they're unable to make the distinction between a philosophical theory and a scientific theory, I kind of get triggered. Because science has been a core tenet of grade school, in middle school, and high school, and college since the invention of those institutions. And the fact that people don't pay attention, or they want to retain their firmly held beliefs about the religious dogma that they've been indoctrinated with since the day that they could walk, really makes my balls itch, especially when you've been presented with evidence, no matter how uncomfortable it makes you feel, is contrary to what you believe. And that's going to be demonstrated here in this interview with Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson, as Tucker Carlson says that he believes evolution is not real. He believes in the theory of adaptation, whatever the fuck that is. I've never heard of that. However, he rejects the theory of evolution that was originally known as Darwinian's theory, according to the individuals who don't actually understand the theory. Let's take a look at the clip.
But if evolution is real, and if there is this constant, I don't know, but it's visible. Like, you can measure it in certain animals.
You can measure adaptation.
Yeah.
But there's no evidence that in fact, I think we've kind of given up on the idea of evolution. The theory of evolution as articulated by Darwin is like kind of not true.
Now, Tucker just foolishly stated that you can measure adaptation, but we've given up on the theory of evolution. First of all, I have no idea who we are, because he's not a scientist, and he apparently doesn't know the theory of evolution, by virtue of the fact that he just said we can measure adaptation, because he's unaware that adaptation is actually a result of evolution. That's a result of evolution. It's a result of evolutionary forces acting on a species that help it adapt to its environment. Do you guys know what an adaptation is? It is a genomic modification within a species that helps it adapt to its environment. It's why polar bears have white fur. It's why whales have blubber. It's why they can produce milk and give live birth underwater. It's also why alligator snapping turtles have worm-like tongues that lure fish so that they can catch them, or snakes produce venom, or cone snails have venom as toxic as they do. These are all adaptations. That is literally evolution. You cannot have an adaptation but evolutionary theory not be true. It actually confirms evolutionary theory. And let's just get a sense of what evolution is, so that going forward in this video, you guys can reference this fundamental element of evolution. Evolution is simply the change in allelic frequency within a population over time. That is simply what evolution is. It is the change in allelic frequency within a population over time. It's not just limited to Darwin's theory of natural selection. That's actually where Darwin got it wrong. If Darwin was alive today, he'd be astounded by the amount of information that he missed, and the amount of information and the gaps that have been filled within evolutionary theory. Because there are other evolutionary forces besides natural selection, such as mutations, genetic drift, non-random mating, and gene flow. These are all evolutionary pressures that act on species, that result in evolutionary changes to their genome that result in them becoming different species. We see this. It's been observed. It can be tested in a lab. It can be demonstrated in a lab. That's what evolution is.
Sense.
Well, in the most basic sense, the idea that, all life emerged from a single cell organism and over time, and there would be a fossil record of that, and there's not.
So again, wild levels of ignorance on display by Tucker Carlson. The idea that we evolved from a single cell organism would be in the fossil record, and it's not. Yes, it absolutely is. And the concept is known as abiogenesis. And the reason we know this is because of a little thing called DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, that consists of adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. It's within every living organism on planet Terra. Every single living organism on planet Terra has DNA. And we can use genetic sequencing, DNA sequencing, to match gene codes to other living organisms and look at the similarities within the gene code and conclude that we had a common ancestor at some point in the 4.5 billion years that Earth has existed. That's literally how that works. The same way we can determine who the father of a child is, the same way we can determine who our great parents was, who our ancestors were, 23andMe, Ancestry.com. Those same methods can be applied and go back further and further to where we can see where certain mutations occurred, certain genes were deleted, where we branched off from a common ancestor. This is how we know that our closest living relatives are chimpanzees, because our DNA differs by 2%. This is how we know we have 50% common DNA with a banana. The same exact methodologies are applied for us to understand at what point we may have had a common ancestor to where we branched off and became a different species. We evolved into a different species. This is explained by non-random mating, natural selection, mutations, genetic drift, and gene flow.
There's not a fossil record of transitionary species, like species that are adapting to its environment.
There's tons of record of adaptation, and you see it in your own life. I mean, I have a lot of dogs. I see adaptation in dogs, through the litter to litter. But no, there's no evidence at all zero, that people evolve seamlessly from a single cell amoeba. No, there's not. There's no chain in the fossil record of that at all.
See, the fact that he just said that lets me know that he's never read a science book, a research article, or been to a museum of natural history. I have no idea if he's actually ignorant, if he's being disingenuous, or he's simply being delusional. Because there is plenty of evidence. There's overwhelming evidence that this has occurred. You know what that evidence is? The fact that different hominid species have walked planet Terra. And the fact that we say humans originated in Africa. Well, if you go back about 1.2 million years, you'll see that there was this thing called an Australopithecine, which was anatomically and habitually more similar to us than any other creature before their time. You had Australopithecus sediba, you had Australopithecus africanus. We also had other transitional species of hominid: Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo neanderthalensis. These were all species of hominid. The genus Hominid, like Homo sapiens, like us, that walked the earth, that lived, breathed, ate, reproduced, made stone tools, hunted large game, had socially complex groups, and anatomically they were a lot like us. We know this because if you go to a museum, you will find fossils of these creatures actually existing, which indicates that we were not the only humans to ever walk this earth. And I know that shatters the biblical philosophy of Adam and Eve, only two people. But this is what science reveals. And this is testable, meaning we can observe it, we can test it, we can predict it, we can prove it. And in essence, if it wasn't true, we could falsify it. However, it withstands scrutiny. It withstands the scientific rigor that tries to falsify it all the time. None of the falsification attempts have prevailed. It remains true, and it remains the consensus amongst scientists that there have been multiple species of hominids that have walked this earth, and there's even more. But those are the ones that we would classify as transitional, or the ones that we could see anatomically came closer and closer to what we appear to look like in the modern day. Not to mention that Homo neanderthalensis was said to have lived with modern humans as recent as 40,000 years ago before they went extinct. So that means we cohabitated Earth with another species of human being.
You don't actually hear you hear them make reference to evolution because the theory of adaptation is clearly, obviously true. But Darwin's theory's totally that's why it's still a theory almost 200 years later.
There is no theory of adaptation. I've never fucking heard of that. There's no theory of adaptation. The theory of adaptation would be evolutionary theory. There's no theory of adaptation. As I stated before in the beginning of the video, an adaptation is a result of an evolutionary pressure, of evolutionary forces. Mutations cause adaptation. Natural selection causes adaptation. Gene flow causes adaptations. Genetic drift causes adaptations. These things lead to adaptations. These things lead to allele changes that lead to adaptations in populations in different environments around the world. That's how we know whales and hippos are related. That's how we know elephants and manatees are related. That's how we can classify lions, tigers, and leopards in the genus Panthera, but not cheetahs or pumas. That's why the newest species of anaconda that was just discovered is still a green anaconda, but because it has a 5% genetic difference, then the green anaconda that we know as simply the green anaconda makes it a new species, makes it a completely different species. That's why Homo sapiens, no matter how different we look in the present day, we're all still the same species because we have less than 0.2% difference in our genome no matter where we are. And that goes for the hunter-gatherer tribes that live all around the world still, such as the Achi in Paraguay or the Hadza in Tanzania. They're still modern humans, even though they live a much more primitive lifestyle, which would actually indicate that we came from a more primitive lifestyle. We came from a more primitive ancestor because they still in the present day live like those ancestors. They don't have iPhones, iPads, microphones, YouTube, Instagram, cars, trains, buses, airplanes. They have none of the modern technologies or medical advancements that we have. They're still susceptible to diseases that we've eradicated. Yellow fever, smallpox. And then there's this whole distinction between a philosophical theory and a scientific theory. We just heard Tucker say that's why it's still a theory. In philosophy, a theory is conjectural, speculative, experiential, intuitive, unsubstantiated. A scientific theory is the complete opposite in the realm of science. It is the most robust framework of substantiated evidence for a particular phenomenon that you could possibly have. It is the equivalent to a fact. It has been proven so much that it likely won't ever change. The reason why it's referred to as a theory is so that if something needs to be modified within it, it can be modified. It still allows that malleability for it to be modified if need be, but it's highly unlikely that it will ever be modified. There's also other scientific theories that are just as concrete as the theory of evolution. You have cell theory, the theory of plate tectonics, Einstein's theory of special relativity, germ theory. There was a point where we didn't know germs, microbials, pathogens that were microscopic could harm us, and that what was killing us. These are all the same theories as evolutionary theory, an overwhelming, insurmountable amount of evidence that these things are true, and they're constantly being tested even to this day still, just to make sure. But we can conclude with 99.9% certainty that these things are true. You even have atomic theory and the Big Bang theory. These are also concrete theories due to religious doctrine that most religious people don't want to accept because they themselves aren't scientists. They don't know how to test hypotheses. They don't know how to conduct experiments. And because God said different, that means you testing something and discovering different is impossible. It couldn't possibly be true. And that couldn't actually be further from the truth.
No, we've not found that at all. And I can't even guess. I mean, I have my own theories on it, but they're not proven.
What are your theories?
God created people, distinctly, and animals. I mean, I think what every person on Earth thought until the mid-19th century, actually.
Right.
Yeah, before science, before we discovered the scientific method, before we realized that we could actually test our observations and our hypothesis for validity to see if they were actually true or false. He's right. He's doing that kooky laugh. I don't know. He's doing that kooky, dorky ass laugh. I have no idea what that's for. It's almost hysterical. It almost makes it look like he's skits or something. But yeah, before science, which means we used religion to explain things we did not understand. And since science has came along, we don't need to use religion or God to explain what we can now understand using the scientific method. And people who still hold that dear to them because religion is a part of our identities. We've evolved to be religious. We've evolved to worship. We've basically evolved a special place in our brain reserved for higher powers that we need in order to explain phenomena we don't understand, especially when we die. We want to know what happens to us after we die, and we see that natural disasters can take human life. So we used to attribute forces to gods that could control natural disasters. Religion also helps humans continue to be a community. It's the glue that keeps a community together. It's the backbone, the foundation of a lot of moral code, a lot of beautiful benefits in society. And I believe in God. But when you test something and you discover that what you thought to be true is no longer true or something contradicts it, and that test withstands scrutiny and the same answers are yielded over and over again with absolute certainty that you can't deny, that although it could be falsified, but it remains to be falsified, you have to accept it. You have to accept it, otherwise you're just being delusional.
It's not a new idea.
They didn't have computers. They didn't have a general understanding that we have today of the process.
Do you think we understand more now?
Yes.
Really?
You don't think that we understand more today?
We understand way less. We understand so little that we're actually sitting here allowing like a bunch of greedy, stupid, childless software engineers in Northern California to like flirt with the extinction of mankind.
So he just said we understand way less. So apparently we haven't modernized medicine. We haven't eradicated diseases. We haven't built skyscrapers. We haven't engineered airplanes, cars, buses, trains, more efficient and effective ways of transportation. We don't have mansions. We don't have artificial intelligence. These apparently aren't things because they understand way more back then than we do today. And that's why I said, I have no idea if he's really this stupid, if he's being disingenuous, or if he's just being delusional. Hell, it could be a combination of all three at this point. I don't know. And I like to think of Tucker Carlson as a relatively rational individual. But sitting here listening to the things that he say, it's clear that he is not versed in science at all. He's about as scientifically illiterate as they come. And it kind of makes sense. He's a conservative. He's a Republican. Basically lives an agriculturally based lifestyle. Believes in most traditional means, conventional methods of living, and that includes his attitudes and mentalities about religion and towards society as a whole, which would explain why he's so scientifically illiterate. But this is scary. This is really scary. For him to have sat here and said these egregious things, shared these ignorant ass takes about what evolution is, what it isn't, how there's no evidence where there's overwhelming amounts of evidence, it's just stupidity. And as I said, you guys have been indoctrinated with your religious dogma. You don't understand that science is observation, hypotheses, experimentation, confirming if what you believe is true or false, and accepting what the results yield because that's what they yield. You don't test to make it true. You test to see if it's true. You can believe that an experiment won't yield the results that you don't want them to yield. You can believe that they will. But ultimately, if you adhere to the scientific method and you apply it the right way, the truth is going to be revealed, especially if it's replicated over and over again. Evolution is a fact, and it's not going to stop being a fact because we aren't done evolving. Even to this day, humans aren't done evolving. We're still evolving. It's not the end for us. Earth has been here approximately 4.6 billion years, and who knows how much longer it will continue to be here after the generation that's watching this video, that's living at this time right now in America. Who knows how long it'll be here after we're gone. But to disregard evolution, to reject it, when there's sufficient evidence for it, insurmountable evidence for it, is in itself disingenuous for you as well. Because you can't run from it. It's inevitable. It's happening whether you like it or not. It has been happening whether you accept it or not. And it will continue to happen whether you agree with it or not. I'll catch you guys on the next dosage. Over and out.